Case 623 by Danny Yu. Chapter 23. When the scene becomes clear once more, the asset's been restrained. He's fighting it for long moments, muscles bulging and straining. A bruise is already forming on his slightly curved belly. Fearful technicians are bustling all around him, trying to stay out of range, even as they set the ultrasound machine back up, searching frantically for moving images, for living heartbeats. For long moments, the asset keeps thrashing before falling back down on his bed, still and placid, eyes staring at nothing, blank once more. The ultrasound wand finds the two fetuses once more. Both tiny heartbeats are clearly visible on the monitor. All at once, the world becomes clear once more. Tony could see the room around him more clearly than he had before. Had he needed glasses and not realized it? Everything was crisp around the edges, so damn clear. He blinked and everything came back. All the rage, all the hatred. He felt the burning start up somewhere deep inside, but he could control it. He knew that instinctively. He could control it. He simply chose not to. Teeth gritted, he let his flaming hand make contact with first the lab equipment, then the computer he'd worked on. It all went up in flame, every trace gone, simple as that. Breathing was easier than it had been in years. He didn't need to give a conscious thought, did not feel like he had to struggle for breath around the arc reactor. That didn't matter, not really. One thing mattered, and one thing alone. Jaime. He blinked, and suddenly the whole world opened up to him in a whole new way. Biomechanics, he reminded himself. This was not all biology. It was tech too. That was the main thing Maya and AIM had overlooked after all. The tech was an integral part, and with no work on that side of things, how could they have ever expected this to work at all? Still, it was a shock like no other to open his eyes and see the world not only through them, but through thousands, no millions of cameras, to have all the information in the world at the tip of his finger. Any other day in his life, it might have made him gape in awe. Right now, he only cared about what he could use it for. He had only one objective. He needed his son out of here, safe, preferably in his arms. He blinked again, and the worst edges of the anger and hatred seemed to bleed away. It did not change the importance of the mission. It did not make him want to kill every living being on this tanker who was not Jaime one bit less. But somehow, it made it all feel unreal, half a step removed. The sensation was so alien, it was near nauseating. Tony pushed it away. He couldn't deal with all that right now, couldn't even begin to process it. He had one thing he needed to do, and one thing only. Afterwards, he'd deal with the rest of it. He stepped up to the door, placed his hand over the lock, and let the heat he was producing so easily burn right through it. Even as the lock began to smolder, he accessed all the security cameras on board and blocked out everything else, focusing on getting a good overview of what was happening in his immediate surroundings. Jaime was 2 floors down and about 150 feet north of him. Quite a few of the minions were occupied on the other side of the platform, and how had he ever thought this was a mere tanker to begin with, dealing with something? Tony couldn't care less what it was. All it meant to him was that they would be out of the way. The lock fell out of the door. Tony checked on the syringe full of serum in the waistline of his jeans. Still there. Sir? Tony blinked, stopped short for a moment. Jarvis? Jarvis? He asked. Sir, I cannot express how happy I am to hear your voice, Jarvis replied. I do, however, understand that brevity is of the essence. I thought you might like to know that Mark 42 is in the cargo hold. An image overlaid with a map that seemingly projected right into his brain. On any other day, Tony would have questioned that. He would have definitely questioned Jarvis's seeming ability to talk right into his mind. Today was not that day. Today, none of that mattered. Can you control the suit? He asked. I am afraid I have been knocked out, Jarvis responded. Tony gritted his teeth, focused on the suit. To his shock, it took only a thought to unlock it and give access back to Jarvis. Get it to Jaime, Tony said. I'm going to free him and I'll inject him with this. Then I need you to take him back to Stark Tower. Understood. Understood, sir, came Jarvis's reply. For a moment, Tony could sense his hesitation, his concern, could see all the lines of code that made up Jarvis flash before his mind's eye. He dismissed it all, jumped down the first set of stairs, then the second. Backup is on its way, sir, Jarvis added. Tony filed that bit of information away. It wasn't relevant right now. It wasn't relevant until it got to him. For now, he was on his own and strangely certain that this was still going to be enough. Not to deal with everything, perhaps, but then that wasn't the priority. Jaime was, and Jaime alone. There was still a good chance Tony wouldn't make it out, but right now he didn't give a flying fuck. Objectively speaking, Rhodey was easily better parent material than Tony was. Truth be told, so long as he could get Jaime out, the boy might be better off if Tony died in the attempt. Somewhere beneath the code scrolling past his vision, some more primitive part of Tony screamed at that idea, but it was easy to ignore. He knocked some minion into the side of the hallway hard enough to crush several bones and distort the metal wall. He didn't stop to watch, only made his way onwards. 3, 4, 5 doors. He stopped at the 6th, reached out and pulled it out of its frame before throwing the distorted metal onto the floor. He stepped inside the room, dismantled the surveillance cameras with half a thought, and made his way to the cot. He ripped the restraints off, careful on Jaime's small arms. "Daddy!" Jaime cried, wrapped his newly freed arms around Tony's neck and clinging so tightly he might have cut off a lesser man's air supply. Tony registered a dim, distant sense of relief and supported the child with a hand under his rump. With his other hand, he reached for the syringe in his waistband. He made out a vein quickly enough and stabbed in the needle, pulled the plunger. "Jarvis!" he said, and a moment later the armor was there, opening up. He deposited Jaime into the shell, felt a flash of satisfaction when he realized he had completed his mission, and well, at that. Jaime stared up at him with an expression he couldn't name. Then the armor closed around him, and he flew off. Without so much as thinking about it, Tony torched the room. Then he turned around and left, using all his senses, human and mechanical, to search out further targets. On the periphery of his senses, Jarvis was flashing the image of a helipad and the directions to get there, but Tony didn't care. Or should he? These people had done him wrong, and Tony wasn't leaving until they had all paid, until none of them remained to pose a threat to James Stark, designated the one person he couldn't live without. He wasn't sure how much time had passed. He was, though. 4.57 minutes, 17 casualties, and 5 fatalities, when he realized Captain Rogers was hailing him, had been hailing him, for 1:07 minutes. It took him a moment to recognize the importance of his own name. "Tony," Captain Rogers said through the comms he wasn't wearing. "They've got the president." It took another several seconds, 12.7, to recognize the significance of that, and another moment, 4.3 seconds, to analyze whether or not that was worth paying attention to. The President of the United States of America was important to the stability of the world, and especially to the stability of the United States of America, of which James Stark was a resident, and that stability was of utmost importance to the safety of James Stark, designated the one person he couldn't live without. Within the next breath, 2.1 seconds, Tony prioritized the President's safety. "Got any instructions, Cap?" he asked. Instructions would be flawed. Captain Rogers did not have any intel on Anthony Stark's current skill set. "Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Colonel Rhodes are extracting POTUS. You and I are going after whoever's responsible for this mess. What can you tell me, Tony?" Anthony Stark attempted to upload every bit of information he had on one Aldrich Killian, only to realize Captain Rogers had no means of downloading said information. "Aldrich Killian. He has a bastardized version of Extremis," Tony said. "That means he has about the same skill set you do, but he also burns and regenerates." The info is woefully insufficient, but the inadequate channels for information sharing did not allow anything further. "Thank you, Tony," Captain Rogers said. "We can do this, you don't need to worry." "I'm not worried," Anthony said. He was not. Why would he be? Captain Rogers might be inferior to Killian, but Killian was very much inferior to Anthony Stark. And even if he hadn't been, worry was such an unnecessary emotion, so unproductive. If anything, it was more likely to stunt progression than foster it, and what was the use of that? "Jarvis," he said, cutting off the link to Captain Rogers for a moment. "Where is Killian?" Anthony Stark could have looked himself, of course, but for this particular job, Jarvis was a fraction faster than he was, until the next upgrade at least, and it was insufficient not to use all programs available. Jarvis hesitated a moment before projecting a location into the mind of Anthony Stark. Anthony Stark immediately pointed all cameras in the vicinity in the right direction, even as he sped up his pace, making for the target with all the speed he could muster. Then he was on the deck, with water to all sides, and Killian right in front of him. It would not be an even fight. Aldrich Killian's version of Extremis was inferior. It did not provide Aldrich Killian with the same stream of information Anthony Stark had access to. While Aldrich Killian might have the biological advantages the serum granted him, he had no access to the technological advancements Anthony Stark's littlest finger could get to with a barest twitch. Aldrich Killian was hopelessly outgunned, and he did not even know it. Somewhere in the back of the mind of Anthony Stark, something crowed with vindictive victory. Some part of him found it pleasant to have outdone this inferior life form. It formed a smile on his face. Anthony Stark did not bother to stop it. It had the effect of intimidating the target, which could only serve him. "Stand down," Anthony Stark ordered, even as his hindbrain admonished him for giving the asshole this much of a chance. This utter bastard had shot his son up with an untested drug that caused immense suffering, Still, the protocols were somehow there in the back of his mind, even though Anthony Stark did not remember anyone programming them. As if from far away, he heard himself repeat the Miranda rights. Aldrich Killian laughed at him. "Is that what you revert to?" he guffawed. "Some rebel you are." Anthony Stark did not compute. When had he ever claimed to be a rebel? Then Aldrich Killian was trying to attack, and Anthony Stark could not allow that to pass. His backup was weaker than he was, and Aldrich Killian was a threat to James Stark, the one person he couldn't live without. He must be ended if he would not allow the system to take its course. Anthony Stark rushed forward, gripped Aldrich Killian by the neck, and threw them both overboard. The ocean would quench their fire, might debilitate Aldrich Killian, but Anthony Stark was so much more than that. He did not know how long he stayed down there, how long everything kept getting darker and darker. As if from far away, he watched as Aldrich Killian grew weaker and weaker. Anthony Stark counted Aldrich Killian's heartbeats carefully, monitoring his life signs as carefully as any AI without access to the internet or medical equipment could be expected to. He monitors his own, too, but prioritized it as lesser. After all, James Stark, the one person he couldn't live without, did not need Anthony Stark nearly as much as he needed Colonel James Rhodes. He sensed the way Aldrich Killian's heartbeat slowed down. He sensed the way his own did, too. 110 beats per minute, then 70, then 50, then 45, then 30, then 20, then 10, then 5. Aldrich Killian's heart might have stopped beating, but there was no way to be sure. Anthony Stark did not know entirely how the underdeveloped version of Extremis worked. He had not taken the time to find out before developing the proper formula. Who knew when Aldrich Killian could survive? It was better to be certain, for the sake of James Stark, designated the one person he couldn't live without. Bit by bit, his uplinks to satellites vanished. Then his internet connection, his link to the Avengers' comm systems, persisted for a while after that, but Anthony Stark had put it on mute a while ago. Then everything else began to shut down too, and suddenly his biovisual display began to short out, flicker at first, and then in blacks flickering in around the edges, swallowing up more and more of the display. Anthony Stark let go of his last breath, and everything went black. As if from far away, he felt a pair of strong arms wrap around him, felt something like, "Up!" Then he felt no more.